Chapter 1349. When Li Keguang heard that they were going against their superiors, a trace of hesitation appeared in his eyes. However, he quickly clenched his teeth and said, "This isn't us going against our superiors, but rather we're rescuing Army Supervisor Gao. Think about it, even we can see the current situation clearly. How smart is Army Supervisor Gao? How could he not see that the situation is hopeless? He didn't surrender only because he didn't want to lose face. Since that's the case, why don't we fulfill his wish?" Fulfill his wish. Xianxia had already thought of a certain possibility. Yes, fulfill his wish. How about this? We'll go find the other generals and say that Army Supervisor Gao doesn't agree to send these 70,000 wounded out. He wants to fight to the death with the 5-star army. That way they'll definitely listen to us. You and I can bring over 100,000 people to surrender to the 5-star army. It'll definitely be a great merit. Li Keguang said as if he had made some sort of decision. Since they wanted to make a contribution, they had to make ample preparations and succeed in one strike. Li Keguang had clearly made enough preparations and thought about a lot of things. Xianxia, who had always followed Li Keguang's lead, knew that he didn't have a choice. Moreover, he also had the same thoughts. He immediately nodded heavily. "All right, I fully support Brother Li. I'll do whatever you say." "Then let's gather the generals." Li Keguang's eyes carried a trace of ferocity. In order to survive, in order to make a contribution, he had made up his mind. Not far away in the tent, Gao Yu was still having a headache. The changes in the army were beyond his expectations. He was somewhat at a loss. Who knew if more wounded people would appear tomorrow after handing over these 70,000 people? If they all surrendered, he would become a general without an army. Then what was the point of holding on? Just as he was feeling conflicted, a burst of noise suddenly came from outside the tent. This made Gao Yu, who was already in a bad mood, couldn't help but shout loudly, "Who's making a racket outside the tent?" Gao Yu was the army supervisor and now the highest-ranking general in the army. When he was angry, he still had some dignity. However, this time he had clearly miscalculated because the tent's curtain had already been lifted from the outside. Then armored Li Keguang, Xianxia, and the others appeared in front of him with blades. Looking at the military uniforms in his hands, Gao Yu was still somewhat puzzled. What were they trying to do? Was there going to be a big war? Why was his commander completely unaware of this? While he was in a daze, Li Keguang suddenly pointed at him and said, "Come on, tie him up." As soon as he finished speaking, 4 big men rushed forward. Before Gao Yu could resist, they had already held him down and put him on the rope. Gao Yu was also a martial artist, so it was not easy for him to be restrained so easily. However, the person who came was too fast. When he was tied up, he was still a mess. Only when he felt that his arm could no longer move did he remember something. He shouted, "Li Keguang, you dare to rebel? Do you want to be exterminated?" "All right, Inspector Gao, you don't have to shout anymore. As the saying goes, a wise man submits to circumstances. This general brought everyone here to save you. Now shut his mouth. We'll talk about it again when he thinks clearly." Of course, Li Keguang was afraid that his family would be exterminated. However, this time he had already convinced the generals. Everyone made the decision together and even signed their names. With this evidence, even if the imperial court questioned them, everyone's words and deeds would be the same. Then when the imperial court found out about this matter, would they punish everyone? Would the imperial court do this? In Li Keguang's opinion, they would not. Now the imperial court was in need of people. If they really did this, it would only disappoint the generals. What's more, the Li family had some influence. Together with the other generals, they weren't an existence that could be bullied by anyone. Of course, after surrendering to the 5-star army, Li Keguang also had to rely on Bugnam of Gojoseon's help to intercede. With this two-pronged approach, he was naturally relieved. Gao Yu was tied up tightly. That night, there were many more people on night duty in the Baiming army camp. At dawn, a fast horse left the camp, carrying the integrity and request of Li Keguang and others, and went straight to the 5-star army. Gao Yu was actually arrested. After Qin Feng saw the letter sent by the Baiming messenger, he was somewhat surprised. However, after thinking about it carefully, everything was reasonable. Surrendering was, of course, a good thing. However, Li Keguang and others also made their own request. That was, they wanted Bugnam of Gojoseon to intercede in front of the Baiming emperor for them. At least they would not make things difficult for their families. Regarding this, Qin Feng did not dare to make a decision on his own. He immediately asked the messenger to wait for a moment. He used the radio to ask for instructions from Yang Chendong. Not long after, the message came back. Yang Chendong agreed to these people's request. He would also write a letter to the Baiming Emperor to intercede for Li Keguang, Zhou Xian and other family members. As a defeated general, Zhu Qiu would definitely not ignore the importance of this letter. Yang Chendong firmly believed in this point. After the messenger got a positive answer, he returned to the camp with joy. At this point, the last Baiming army on the grassland had all surrendered. In this battle, except for 10,000 people who escaped from the Baiming army, the rest of the 400,000 people were all killed or captured. In comparison, Baiming's military strength fell into a disadvantage. Yang Chendong returned triumphantly with 2,000 black cavalry and came to the first city. In the palace of the first city, Yang Chendong first met with a group of generals and praised their performance. Then those who should perform meritorious deeds should perform meritorious deeds, and those who should be rewarded should be rewarded. After the generals retreated, Yu Mian, the lord of the first city, stood in front of Yang Chendong. Next to him was Tiger's Mane, the commander of the new army, and Yang Si, the commander of the logistics command. "You've worked hard," Yang Chendong said with a satisfied expression as he looked at these three trusted subordinates. "Young master," sixth young master, "has worked hard." The three of them did not dare to claim credit and quickly replied respectfully. "All right, we're not outsiders, so let's be casual. Now on this grassland, there's no Baiming army coming to cause trouble, and there's no Walla and Tartars harassment. Next, it's a period of great development. Are you ready?" Yang Chendong asked with bright eyes. "Sixth young master, as you said, everything is ready," Yu Mian replied with cupped fists. Yang Si, who was at the side, also had an excited look on his face. "Young master, the people are in place and the tools are ready. We're just waiting for the order." What the two of them were talking about was what Yang Chendong had mentioned before. The silver mineral reserves on the grassland were astonishing. In the future, the Mongol Empire had benefited a lot from this place. Now that they had not appeared and it was impossible for them to appear, these benefits naturally belonged to Xianxia. Just in this area alone, in terms of copper mines in the future, it was known as China's 6 great copper veins. Its reserves and quality were the best in the world. In the Great Ming Dynasty, almost all of the Great Ming Dynasty's copper veins were in the hands of the imperial court. Xianxia tried his best, but it was difficult to obtain them. But now it was different. Occupying this place was equivalent to having more mines. Not only that, but there were also large amounts of lead, zinc, cobalt, gold and silver mines. This was a huge treasure trove. Yang Chendong didn't dare to do it before because there were too many uncertainties. If he couldn't guarantee safety, once the enemy appeared during the mining process, wouldn't he be making a wedding dress for others? Now that Baiming's army had been defeated, there were no other decent enemies here. The matter of mining could finally be brought up to his daily work. "Good, I'll leave this matter to the three of you. Just follow the map. Believe in this prince, the results will definitely surprise you." Yang Chendong laughed loudly. After finishing this important matter, Yang Chendong talked about the southern Ming dynasty. "We have won this battle. The request we made before will not change. 1 million people of the Great Ming dynasty must be sent over. Then you can choose a few suitable people and send them to Crimson City. Also, there is no need to return these hundreds of thousands of Baiming prisoners. If they must, Gao Yu and a few other generals can be sent back, but not a single soldier. Understand?" This was Yang Chendong's arrangement for returning to Crimson City. Speaking of which, it had been more than 2 years since he left Crimson City. His wife and children were there, as well as many developing munitions factories. There were also too many things that he needed to worry about, so he had to go back. Tiger's Man and the other two naturally knew that the 6th young master was going back to Crimson City. Such military secrets would not be hidden from them. The three immediately knelt down and kowtowed. "I wish the young master a safe journey and good health." "Ah, good, I'll take advantage of your auspicious words. I'll leave the matters here to you." After laughing loudly, Yang Chendong immediately let Beta Persei attend the banquet. For a moment the guests and the host were happy. On the morning of the 3rd day, Yang Chendong left the first city with 2,000 black cavalry and headed towards the 3 eastern provinces. Baiming's capital. In the throne room there was a solemn atmosphere. A memorial was scattered on the ground, and the words written on it were floating everywhere. All the officials did not even dare to breathe loudly. Zhou Xian was really angry. Although he was able to obtain the throne, it was inseparable from the support of all the officials. However, the battle report sent by Marquis Shi had angered him. At this moment he was standing in front of the golden dragon throne with his hands on his waist. He looked like a shrew who was cursing in the street. The battle report was sent by Shi. It was about the defeat of the Baiming army after they left Tulu City. Even though the situation regarding the aftermath hadn't arrived yet, just the news that the 5-star army was attacking Tulu City and that the city was already in danger was enough to make Zhou Qiu's rage overflow to the heavens. Everyone knew that once Tulu City was lost, the 400,000 soldiers of northern Ming would be like children without a mother. Unless they could take down Shi City, the 400,000 soldiers would not be able to return due to the lack of rations. All the ministers in the hall who had some brains naturally saw this. It was precisely because of this that no one dared to speak out. Chapter 1350. Say what? Tulu City was thousands of miles away. Now that there was a problem, it was too late to say anything. As for ordering the army to reinforce, Wu Qinghe was in the Wanquan City division. He should have gone to help, but he didn't because he had no soldiers at his disposal. What else could the others do? No matter what he said, it would be too late to do anything. The hall was silent, but Zhou Qiu didn't vent his anger. He continued to glare with bloodshot eyes, his face filled with unwillingness as he roared, "Say something! Say something! Aren't you all quite powerful? The words of the Holy Sun come out of your mouth. Now that the country is in trouble, is there anyone who can share our burden?" The hall was still silent. This was war and people would die. It wasn't some ordinary task. If they couldn't do it well, they could think of a way to make up for it, or even find an excuse to make someone else take the blame. But on the battlefield, if they lost, they would be captured if they didn't die. How could there be room for excuses? Who wasn't afraid of death? This was especially true for the ministers who were used to the emperor's grace. They lived in luxury every day, only wishing that their days would be a bit slower. Who would take the initiative to seek death? The civil officials didn't say anything, and the generals were the same. No matter how powerful a general was, in the face of such a decline, what could they do? War required planning, which involved mobilizing troops, provisions, supplies, and familiarizing oneself with the situation of the army. Only then could one calmly make arrangements. But the attack on Tulu City was an unexpected situation. Who could turn the tide in such a short time? Not to mention that the generals had already been suppressed by the civil officials and lacked courage. Even if they had the ability, by the time they gathered the army and rushed to Tulu City, the city would have been occupied by the 5-star army. They had already suffered defeat before the battle had even begun. How many people could bear the consequences? If they didn't go to war, they would only be cursed for being useless. Once they stepped forward to lead the army, they would undoubtedly be defeated. When the time came, not only would they have to bear the responsibility and be cursed, but it was also possible that their family would be exterminated. If that really happened, they would be the true sinners of their families. Everyone had their own thoughts and no one had the courage to stand out. Zhou Qiu, who was standing in front of the golden dragon throne, was deeply disappointed. Looking at these people who usually shouted "Long live the Emperor," and claimed that they were willing to die 10,000 deaths for the Emperor at this moment, they had all become mutes and decorations. That deep sense of disappointment made him feel as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. Xiaoqian wanted to continue cursing, but after thinking about it, there was no point in doing so. He turned his head to the chief eunuch Jining and said, "Let's end the court session. The officials of the 6 ministries will stay. Court is dismissed." Jining, who was also pale with fright, hurriedly nodded as if she had heard the voice of heaven. Then she announced the end of the court session. Soon only the ministers of the 6 ministries were left in the originally crowded hall. Ever since the Great Ming dynasty was divided into the north and the south, Zhou Qiu, the acting grandmaster, abandoned the cabinet and directly handed over the specific matters to the 6 ministries' ministers, letting them be responsible for themselves. By doing so, he could naturally concentrate all the power on himself, but it was really tiring. Usually he had to read memorials until midnight every day. Usually, after resting for more than 2 hours, the sky would brighten and it would be time for morning court. For the sake of the great Ming dynasty's revitalization, Zhu Qiu suffered all the hardships. However, the effect was not obvious. Although it seemed that he had the support of the Zhu family's bank and now had money and soldiers, he would always suffer a great loss whenever he faced the five-star army. Previously it was still okay and the loss of soldiers and generals was within an acceptable range. However, this time, it involved an army of 400,000. His heart really ached. At this moment, the ministers of the 6 ministries were standing below the throne room. Each of them had their heads lowered like primary school students who had made a mistake. Zhu Qiu looked down at the 6 ministries' ministers. His mood was not very good. Especially when his gaze landed on the Minister of Rights, Hu Shao. A wave of anger rose from the bottom of his heart. This person had married his granddaughter to Yang Chendong. If someone said that such a person could be loyal to him, he definitely would not believe it. However, as the oldest official in the court, Hu Shao could be said to have done things flawlessly. In addition, he had always been very popular, so it was not easy to find fault with him. Of course, he was just a minister. It was not difficult for Zhu Qiu, who already had all the power in his hands, to remove him. However, he was worried. He was worried that if he suddenly stabbed Hu Shao, it would incur the wrath of Yang Chendong. Although the 5-star army was strong, looking at its history, they had never found trouble with Baiming. On the contrary, it was always him who took the initiative to provoke them. Could it be that the 5-star army did not have the strength to do so? Zhu Qiu did not think so. The reason why the other party did not make a move was because he had too many misgivings. For example, the members of the Yang family. Yang Chendong's brothers and sisters were all in the capital. Also, wasn't this Hu Shao an existence that he was afraid of? As an emperor, he could not let his emotions affect his decisions. He had to consider all the relationships and take the big picture into consideration. Take this Hu Shao for example. Although Zhu Qiu knew that he could not sincerely use him, given that he had not done anything to harm Baiming's interests, Zhu Qiu could only tolerate him for now. Fortunately, as the countries around Baiming were all under Yang Chendong's control, the Bureau of Rights was of little use. Whether or not it was, there was not much difference. Zhu Qiu lightly coughed and turned his attention to the other ministers. Sweeping his gaze around, he said, "My beloved subjects, it is time for everyone to come up with a plan for how to deal with the siege of Talu City." There were too many people in the hall, and I presume that my beloved subjects did not want to say anything. Now that there are no outsiders, we can say whatever we want behind closed doors. We will pardon all of you. Zhu Qiu's tone was amiable and his voice was gentle. Yes, I was not angry when you did not express your stance. After all, there were too many people, and what if you said something wrong? But now there is no one else here. If you have any ideas, feel free to say it. Regardless of whether it is right or wrong, you are not wrong. It was not easy for Zhu Qiu to use such a tone. At the same time, he looked at the 6 ministers expectantly, waiting for them to come up with a plan to solve the problem. Reality disappointed him once again. The hall fell into silence again. The 6 ministers were like mutes. They lowered their heads and did not speak. It was as if there was a beautiful pattern on the ground that was worth studying. Zhu Qiu endured it when everyone did not speak up. But now he had already said so much, but no one said a word. This was somewhat unacceptable. If it wasn't for the fact that he was in dire need of manpower and it wasn't appropriate to make a big fuss about it, he was afraid that he would have to teach these 2 people a lesson today to intimidate them. Forcibly suppressing the anger in his heart, he finally decided to listen to everyone's opinions by name. Didn't you all say nothing? Then I will ask one by one. Let's see if you still dare to not speak. His gaze first fell on the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji. He was a big shot in charge of human resources. Since it was a war, he naturally had to choose a general first. Asking Wang Ji was a matter of course. Naturally, when he saw Wang Ji, Zhu Qiu was also angry. He would not forget that this person's grandson Wang Xijing had learned Yang Chendong's teachings. He should be teaching at the headquarters of Yang Chendong, the place called Xichen City. Such a person would probably be disloyal. Shaking his head, Zhu Qiu threw these undesirable thoughts aside. Forget it. Speaking of which, all the civil and military officials in the imperial court were once officials of the same court as Yang Chendong. Was he going to investigate them and remove them from their positions? Suppressing the anger in his heart, he looked at Wang Ji and said, "Minister Wang, tell me your opinion." Wang Ji, who was called, finally raised his head with a puzzled expression. When he saw that Zhu Qiu was serious, he shook his head. This old minister has no objections. Everything will be decided by your majesty. No objections. Hearing Wang Zhi's reply, Zhu Qiu was really angry. Since you have no objections, then what are you saying? But when he thought about it, it seemed that he was the one who forced the other party to say it. But did he really have no objections? You are the Minister of Personnel, the so-called heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel. All the officials in the world are under your control. What did you mean by saying that you have no objections? Zhu Qiu's expression kept changing, but it quickly returned to normal. He could actually understand Wang Zhi. Under his suspicion, it would be inappropriate for him to propose any candidate at this time. Perhaps even if he proposed a suitable candidate, he would not approve it. Since that was the case, what was the point of saying more? Just when Zhu Qiu thought that he had thought everything through, Wang Zhi suddenly spoke again. Your Majesty, this subject is old and has not been sleeping well recently. There are many things that I am unable to do. Therefore, I would like to resign and retire to the countryside. Your Majesty, please grant me permission. Wang Zhi actually resigned. This was somewhat out of Zhu Qiu's expectations. Out of a conspiracy theory, he could not help but wonder if this was the other party's way of retreating. But when he thought about it, it was not very likely. After all, it was not good for one's reputation to submit one's resignation when the country was in danger. Unless such a person was no longer an official, his reputation would definitely take a hit. Who would listen to such a person's words in the future? If that was the case, this Wang Zhi really wanted to resign. Sighing in his heart, Zhu Qiu had already decided to agree. After all, both parties were suspicious of each other. This job was not easy to do. Since that was the case, it was better to let him leave. Sometimes he did not reply. He could not possibly agree immediately when the other party said that he wanted to resign. Wouldn't that make others misunderstand that he wanted the other party to leave? His gaze shifted from Wang Zhi to the Minister of Works, Shi Pu. Logically speaking, this was a military issue and the Minister of Works had nothing to do with it. However, the cannons and firearms that accompanied the army this time were made by the Ministry of Works. Now that the army was defeated, did that mean that the Ministry of Works did not do a good job? Chapter 1351. When Shi Pu's name was called, he immediately knelt on the ground. Your Majesty, this old subject is guilty. This old subject deserves 10,000 deaths. Zhu Qiu frowned when he didn't even say anything. Why did Shi Pu have such an attitude? Zhu Qiu frowned, but the other party quickly gave him an answer. Your Majesty, a 5-star military fire weapon is so powerful that it's not something we can compare with. In terms of firearms alone, we're not their match at all. Shi Pu almost cried for real. It was evident that he knew his weapon was inferior to the other parties. Speaking of which, compared to the technology and weapons brought by Yang Chendong, it would be more shocking if the Ministry of Works could produce similar products. Shi Pu was naturally aware of this point. Afraid that he would be punished for this, he took the initiative to bring it up. His kneeling caused Zhu Qiu to lose the idea of asking him for a plan. This kind of person was already frightened by the 5-star army. Could he still rely on him to come up with any good ideas? Shaking his head, Zhu Qiu wanted to call for another minister. But at this time the Crown Prince's junior tutor, Grand Scholar and Minister of Justice, Zhou Xian, spoke without being asked. Your Majesty, this subject believes that it will be difficult to solve the siege of Lu City. Finally, someone took the initiative to speak. Zhu Qiu was happy in his heart. When he looked at Zhou Xian, his tone became much gentler. Beloved official Zhou, please continue. Yes. Zhou Xian cupped his fists with a solemn expression. Your Majesty, the bravery of the 5-star army is unimaginable. With their firearms, I'm afraid that by the time the memorial reaches the capital would have already fallen into their hands. For a city that has already been conquered, it would be useless no matter how much effort we put in. Rather than this, why not place the all-encompassing department on the front lines and increase the number of troops there while considering the matter of negotiating with the 5-star army? No tribute, no land, no reparations, no political marriages, and no titles of kings with different surnames. These were the Great Ming's strength of character. It was a pity that after the Great Ming divided the south, its strength was not as strong as before. Many rules had also changed. Let's talk about not being conferred the title of king. Where did Bugnam of Gojosian come from? Since he had already broken the ancestral rules, what harm was there in breaking a few more? This was what Su Yozhen meant when she proposed to negotiate with the 5-star army. After saying all this, he took a step back. He knew that some things needed to be considered. The more he said before that, the more mistakes he would make. Sure enough, when Zhu Qiu heard that they were going to negotiate with the 5-star army, her face became very ugly. An ominous glint flashed in his eyes, representing the anger in his heart. As the saying goes, if the monarch is humiliated, his subjects will die. However, when he looked at the other 5 ministers, their expressions didn't change at all. It was as if Su Yozhen's words were nothing out of the ordinary. The hall fell into silence once more, and only the sound of Zhu Qiu's heavy breathing could be heard. Zhu Qiu was originally an ambitious emperor. Ever since he took the position, he had been diligent in government affairs. It could be seen from the fact that he had less than 6 hours of rest every day. Unfortunately, one of the biggest lies in the world was that if you worked hard you would succeed. This was because many people were indeed very capable, but they always lacked a bit of luck or talent. In the end, their wishes didn't come true. Zhu Qiu belonged to the type of people who were very unlucky. Not to mention that in history he was overturned by Zhu Qizhen. Just the fact that he met Yang Chendong in this life had already determined his fate. No matter how hard he worked, he wouldn't be able to unify the Great Ming. The result of his hard work was that Baiming would be destroyed a little later than usual. With the difficulty in front of him, Zhu Qiu naturally didn't want to lower his head. However, reality was so cruel. The 5-star army was so powerful. If he still stubbornly insisted on going against the 5-star army, he might even lose his family fortune. He might even lose the throne. This situation was so big that he had to consider it carefully. Could he really afford to gamble? He had the heart to kill the enemy, but he was powerless to reverse the situation. This sentence was the most appropriate to describe Zhu Qiu. When a person's strength wasn't strong, even if they were angry, they couldn't do anything. Moreover, if one wanted to achieve great things, they couldn't let their emotions affect their decisions. Thinking about Baiming's current situation, even if he wanted to mobilize the army, it would take time. Moreover, their fighting strength was so weak that even Zhu Qiu didn't have confidence. In the end, after a long sigh, Zhu Qiu's mood began to stabilize again. Su Yozhen, who had been secretly observing, saw that Zhu Qiu's mood was gradually stabilizing. She took a small step forward and said, "Your Majesty, a little impatience spoils great plans." Su Yozhen's actions were just to give Zhu Qiu a way out. After hearing this, Zhu Qiu sighed and said, "That's right. Beloved official Su is right. The strength of the 5-star army isn't something we can fight against without making preparations. Since it's like this, let's talk with them. Didn't they say they wanted 1,000,000 commoners last time? Let's discuss this matter and see if it can be done." Although it was a question, the fact that Zhu Qiu was able to say these words already proved that he approved of this proposal. Otherwise, why would he casually mention it? It had to be said that the so-called commoners in the eyes of the emperor mostly referred to the commoners that could be seen. For example, the officials in the palace hall, as well as the gentry and nobles who could submit memorials from time to time. After all, the emperor lived in the palace all year round. What was the outside world like? How were the commoners living? All of this was nothing more than hearsay, and a basic impression he got from reading the memorials. Most of the time, the so-called world peace and prosperity in the history books referred to the officials, scholars and country gentry living a good life. As for the commoners at the bottom, at least before the establishment of China, they didn't have enough to eat and wear. Without a clear understanding of the commoners, it was impossible to understand the true pain of handing over 1,000,000 commoners. In Zhu Qiu's eyes, all of this was just a number. It was still the same sentence. The foundation of the Great Ming dynasty was still there. It was just 1,000,000 commoners at the bottom, so it was fine to pay. As long as the emperor and the officials could live well, what did this matter? Zhu Qiu had never taken the people at the bottom seriously, and had never treated them as human beings. Only then did Zhu Qiu casually ask this question. In that instant, the eyes of several people from the 6 ministries lit up. They knew that the time for them to speak had come. As if he was afraid that Zhu Qiu would look down on him, the Minister of Revenue, Jin Lian, who wanted to make his presence known, was the first to stand up. "Your Majesty, this matter can be discussed. However, the topic needs to be changed. This isn't because we fear Bugnam of Gojosian and want to give them 1,000,000 commoners. Rather, under the other party's request, we want to reward Bugnam of Gojosian with the magnanimity of the Celestial Empire. The ancient people cared a lot about face. They opened their mouths and spoke of benevolence and righteousness. It wasn't a problem to ask them to hand over 1,000,000 commoners, but if they were forced to do so, then it didn't make sense. Who knew how the history books of later generations would scold them? Even if it was for the sake of their reputation, they had to cover it up. Zhu Qiu naturally approved of this. He didn't want the people of later generations to scold him as a fatuous ruler. As a result, he nodded and said, "That's right. Beloved official Jean is right. Then I'll leave this matter to you to discuss. Once you have the results, just report it to me. When the time comes, the Ministry of Rights can send someone to communicate with the 5-star army. I think it would be better for Minister Hu to go personally. After all, Wunan Wang is your grandson-in-law. This subject is unwell. Please retire and return to your hometown." The Minister of Rights, Hu Ming, straightforwardly put down the board in his hand and knelt as he spoke. This was clearly a trap. To hand over 1,000,000 commoners for his own safety, this wasn't good to hear but also hard to say. With Hu Ming's shrewdness, it would be strange if he agreed to do such a thing that would go down in history for 10,000 years. Not to mention that Zhu Qiu had deliberately pointed out his relationship with Yang Chendong. Hu Shao was even less likely to pick up on this topic. He didn't ask for people to say that he was himself and his grandson-in-law was his grandson-in-law. However, as long as he was the one who did it, it was inevitable that others would mention it and say that he was a traitor. Hu Ming knelt on the ground and asked for his resignation. This greatly exceeded Zhu Qiu's expectations. The Minister of Rights, Wang Zhi, had already asked for his resignation and he had basically agreed. If he let Hu Ming leave now, those who didn't know would think that he wasn't tolerant. He was venting his anger on his subordinates because they had lost a battle. Zhu Qiu was someone who cared about his reputation. His face immediately darkened and he wanted to curse. However, he knew that his deterrence towards Hu Ming was too little. He couldn't casually take him down and anger Yang Chendong, but he also couldn't remove him from his position and make Bugnam of Gojosian think too much. After realizing his helplessness, Zhu Qiu could only shake his head with an ugly expression. "Since beloved official whose health isn't good, you should rest at home for a while. You are a pillar of the country and cannot be left out. After your body recovers, you still have to share my burdens. I'll leave this matter to the left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Huang Qing, to handle." Zhu Qiu backed down. In the end, he still didn't have the guts to remove Hu Ming from his position. This was enough to prove that he was very afraid of Yang Chendong. "This old subject thanks your majesty." After receiving benefits, Hu Ming expressed his thanks and stood up. Then he turned and strode away. Although he was old, he didn't seem to be feeling unwell at all. After Hu Ming left, he didn't even have the intention to discuss the matter. It was clear that he wouldn't participate in this matter. This was to avoid suspicion. However, in reality, how could he not want to avoid the matter being discussed? That was millions of commoners. If he handed them over, it would cause a lot of discussion. He definitely wouldn't do something that would damage his reputation. Chapter 1352. As soon as Hu Shao left, Wang Zhi also strode after him. He had just asked to resign, and from the looks of it, Zhu Qiu had already agreed. Right now he only needed to go home and prepare his things. He would not step into this trap. The remaining 4 ministers looked at each other, but in the end they did not say anything. Since they did not have the courage to resign, they had to face some things that they had to face. Zhu Qiu left the 6 ministers behind. That night the news reached the ears of the ministers. In accordance with Bugnam of Gojosian's wishes, Baiming wanted to negotiate with him. At the same time, the news of Hu Shao recuperating at home and Wang Zhi resigning also spread. The left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Huang Qing, was temporarily in charge of the Ministry of Rights. The left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments, He Wenyuan, was in charge of the evaluation and appointment of all the ministers. When the news came out, the houses of the 2 ministers were filled with people and carriages. Countless officials used all sorts of reasons to congratulate them or reminisce about the past. It gave people the feeling that there was no danger at the border. From this, it could be seen that Baiming's foundation had already been shaken. On the morning of the second day, one minister and the other temporarily in charge of the Ministry of Rites, Huang Qing and He Wenyuan, came to the palace to express their thanks. What they saw was indeed Zhu Qiu's cold face. It was because the embroidered uniform guards had sent over information. According to them, Baiming's 400,000 soldiers were in danger. Even the 100,000 Liaodong cavalry led by Fang Dingshan had been injured by the five-star army. They had either been killed or captured. This was like a bolt from the blue that smashed into Zhu Qiu's head, completely destroying his dreams. At the same time, it was like a heavy stone had smashed into the heads of the ministers, making them recognize reality. The five-star army is actually this powerful? After the Minister of War Yi Ming heard the news, he stood in place as if he had been petrified. A newly appointed minister, a minister in charge of carrying out the duties of a minister, had encountered such a thing on his first day. His expression was also extremely ugly. They did not even have time to flatter the emperor. Instead, they discussed the matter of negotiating with the five-star army with the other four ministers. This time there was also the imperial censor of the left, Qin Yi. The censor represented the imperial censor. This matter was of great importance. In order to reduce the number of accusations and scoldings, Qin Zhao had to participate. Of course, this didn't stop people from poking at their backs. After all, some people made a living doing this. They could hear about things and impeach anyone they didn't like. Sometimes even the emperor was their target. They would often say that the emperor was immoral, that he needed to wake up 3 times, or that he had already committed a crime. Baiming didn't have much time left, so he had to quickly come up with a countermeasure. It could be seen that they had no choice but to agree to Yang Qindong's request in a hurry. However, the migration of millions of people was not a small matter, and preparations had to be made. As for the mastermind Yang Qindong, he had indeed left Origin City long ago. After more than a month, he had arrived at Haiphong City in Yunnan Province. Haiphong City was a seaside city that belonged to the Vietnam province. With the continuous expansion of the five-star army's navy and the destruction of the nearby countries and forces, it had become an important port for the five-star army's navy. For example, the people of other races from the Vietnam province who had come to support other places would board the ships here and be sent to different places. Yang Qindong's ship also stopped here. The person in charge of receiving them was the commander of the 2nd Sea Division, Zhao Chongwang. This time they stopped at Haiphong City to replenish their food supplies. Unexpectedly, after the ship stopped, Yang Qindong disembarked with 500 black cavalry soldiers. He said that he wanted to investigate the situation of the people. Over the years, Yang Qindong's main focus was on expanding the territory. He only had a simple understanding of the destroyed countries and occupied territories from some memorials and local reports. Without investigation, there was no right to speak. It wasn't that Yang Qindong didn't trust his officials, but he was worried about the situation below. Sometimes, even the officials he appointed would be fooled by the people below. Wasn't there a saying among the people? The king of hell was easy to see, but the little devils were hard to deal with. Often, the performance of the lowest-level officials was the most important thing to the lives of the people. He didn't say anything to anyone. Even Zhao Chongwang left with the main ship under his orders. Only Xin Xing was left with the ship at the port, ready to set off at any time. Yang Qindong, on the other hand, changed into a set of green robes. He brought the Black Rider Dragon Guards, who were also wearing commoner clothes, ashore and headed towards the nearby fields. Haiphong City was under the jurisdiction of Chu Yi City, and Yang Qindong placed the first target of his investigation here. In a restaurant on Dong En Street in the city, Yang Qindong found a seat by the window. The restaurant's location was not bad and the view was good. More importantly, it was very lively and there were all kinds of people. Often, it was this kind of person's personal attitude expressed by their words and actions that was the most authentic. He ordered a pot of wine, 1 meat and 1 vegetable. On his left was Beta Persei and on his right was Chiu Vi. Yang Qindong sat there and listened to the discussions of the people at the next table with great interest. Because of Yang Bao, the people of the country were no longer ignorant people who only looked up at the sky and looked down at the ground. They had a better understanding of the outside world, and they had begun to learn how to discuss national affairs. This was just like the capital of the future. Anyone who was found could give some opinions on national policies and national affairs. It gave people the feeling that if they were to become officials, they would definitely do better than others. There were many such people in the restaurant. Through their mouths, they already knew that the 5-star army had won the battle in the first city, and that they had surrounded and captured 400,000 Baiming soldiers. Even the 5-star army had asked Baiming to provide 1 million Han Chinese people. A young man who was dressed very ordinarily, but had a good spirit and appearance, took a sip of warm wine at this time and began to talk loudly. Bugnam of Zhou Xian is wise. After winning the battle, he doesn't want the land. He only wants the people. This seems to benefit the imperial court of Baiming, but in fact without the population how long can Baiming last? This is like boiling a frog in warm water. Before long without the people Baiming will not have any chance to fight back. When the time is ripe isn't it easy to take them down? As soon as this person spoke, Yang Chendong, who was sitting there, was stunned. He really didn't expect that there would be such a genius among the people. He actually analyzed the matter so thoroughly. He couldn't help but look at him in a new light. Alright, this brother of yours just read the recent Yang report and that's why he said this. Speaking of which, you didn't see this. It's just what the Yang report said. Another dark-skinned man with a stronger body retorted. His Chinese was not very standard, but it was enough to let people understand what he wanted to say. Just now Yang Chendong was still shocked by this person's clear thinking. Now, after hearing this, he realized that this was not this person's idea, but a public report in the Yang report. Then he smiled and sighed in his heart. Good, this Yang report did a good job. He opened up the wisdom of the people. Don't think that the people who don't know the reason are the best and the most obedient. In fact, this is not beneficial to a country at all. Other than being useful to corrupt officials, it is useless to a country. If the people don't have a sense of ownership, how can they love a country? For thousands of years, how many people faced the change of dynasties and didn't have many thoughts at all? In their eyes, no matter who became the emperor, they were still ordinary people. As long as they could eat their fill and wear warm clothes, it was the same no matter who the emperor was. This was the drawback of not having the spirit of a master. Often there were a lot of people like this. They had no beliefs, no goals, and no understanding of the outside world. Once someone stood out and urged them to rebel, they would be easily fooled without knowing the truth. With the wisdom of the people, things would be different. They would have their own judgment. Once something happened, they would be able to analyze it in their own way. In the face of such smart people, it would be even more difficult to make use of them. In the restaurant, everyone laughed. The man who spoke first didn't get angry because he was exposed. Instead, he said with conviction, "It's true that what Yang Bao said just now was true. However, I agree with him and can use him. What can you do about it?" There's nothing we can do about it. You are so wise and powerful." The others laughed loudly and said. The atmosphere in the restaurant was good. Obviously, many people were excited because they could participate in the discussion of the country's affairs. It seemed that this could prove that they were useful people. They were no longer muddle-headed people who didn't know what the outside world was and didn't know what to do tomorrow. Yang Chendong waited for half an hour. He saw groups of people leave and groups of people come. From their mouths he heard many things about Yizu City and even Vietnam. There were all kinds of big and small things. For example, someone in the East City got married. Someone in the West City got a military merit because his son joined the 5-star army. Not long ago, the local Vietnamese auxiliary soldiers beat gongs and drums and sent a certificate of merit and rice noodles. Old Wang in the South City had a better harvest this year than anyone else. He was already named as an agricultural pioneer and so on. Naturally, there were also some minor officials who were sued because they overcharged a merchant or a commoner. They were arrested and sent to the Yamen. There were also people who shouted that Governor Luan was a wise man. From these trivial matters, Yang Chendong's expression had always been good. It was said that one could see the whole leopard from a single spot and see the overall situation from a corner. Just from the information obtained in the restaurant, it could be seen that the entire Yizu City was still very good. At least Yang Chendong was satisfied. Although there were some small flaws such as some minor officials who did not abide by the law, this was unavoidable. Chapter 1353. The human heart was like this. There were always some people whose desires began to expand after they gained power. Often such people could not be seen before they got to the top. Sometimes the human heart had to be tested to know. Let's go and take a look at the fields. It was now the end of September, the time of harvest. Yang Qindong wanted to personally take a look at the fields and understand the first-hand details. Yang Qindong got up and left. Beta Persei put down a few Han coins on the table and left with Qiu Vi. Not far away, hundreds of black cavalry in different clothes also got up and kept a certain distance from the center of the city to the south city. Yang Qindong just heard that old Wang in the south city planted well and had a great harvest. He wanted to see the results of this harvest. Compared to the prosperity and satisfaction of the people in the city, the outside of the south city was a busy scene. On the cultivated fields, there were countless small black dots busily digging. Countless sweet potatoes were dug out from the ground one by one and sent to the prepared bamboo baskets at the side. After asking around casually, he found old Wang's place. Yang Qindong walked closer and found that the sweet potatoes of this family were bigger and fuller than the other neighbors. Ah, this must be Brother Wang. This year's harvest is good. Yang Qindong walked closer with a smile on his face. Although he was wearing a green robe, his temperament could not be changed. Farmer Old Wang could feel it at first glance when he saw Yang Qindong. His expression became more respectful and said, "I don't dare to be called Brother Wang. Just call me Old Wang. But I wonder who this gentleman is. Oh, I'm just a passerby. I heard that the harvest here is good, so I came to take a look. How is it? This year's harvest is good. The days should be better than the previous years." Of course, Yang Qindong would not reveal his identity. He chuckled and squatted down. He came to the ground and put his hand into the soil. Not long after, a huge sweet potato was dug out by him. Yang Qindong's movements were still very standard. It was not an exaggeration to say that he looked like a professional. After all, he had done this kind of farm work in the early days of the Yang family village. He was the one who dug out the earliest potatoes, so he naturally had his own experience. When an expert made a move, one would know whether or not he was an expert. When Yang Qindong did this, Lao Wang laughed. "I didn't expect this mister to be an expert as well, hee." This smile instantly brought the relationship between the two of them closer. When they started to talk, they naturally became much more casual. Old Wang was a talkative person. It didn't take long for Yang Qindong to learn a lot of things from him. For example, the reason why his family's land had a better harvest and higher output was because he was more willing to use fertilizer. Compared to other people, his family also raised a lot of poultry such as chickens, ducks, geese, porpoises, pigs, and so on. Using their feces on the ground could make the soil more fertile, so the yield would naturally be higher than other people's. Not only that, once the grain was harvested, in order to prevent the grain from being cheap and harming the farmers, he could also use the surplus grain to feed the poultry. Then he could sell the meat to increase his income, allowing him to live a better life. Wasn't this the cycle of the food chain? Could it be called reasonable utilization? After Yang Qindong heard this, he asked with a surprised expression, "Lao Wang, how did you think of these things? You are really smart." I am a person who does not eat a single word. How could I have such a brain?" This was all said by our provincial governor Xiao Wan. These things were also recorded in the Yang report. It was just that other people were suspicious. The old man was honest and felt that it was feasible, so he did it. Thus this year the output of the land was much higher than others, and the meat was also sold at a high price. However, next year the other farmers will follow suit. This way the price of meat and grain will drop a little. However, this is already very good. To think that I, Lao Wang, have lived for close to 50 years. When have I ever lived like this? In the past, I had to thank the heavens for being able to eat my fill. Once there was a famine, I had to go out early to beg for food. Now that I think about it, those days were really not for humans. Lao Wang was still sighing and saying something, but Yang Qindong could no longer hear him. His thoughts had already landed on the sentence that he just said, "The price of meat and grain will drop a little next year." There was a saying that said, "Prosperity. The common people suffered. Death. The common people suffered." This not only meant that the people who started the war were the common people, but it also meant that when there was a harvest, the people who suffered were still the common people. Because once there was a harvest, the grain would face the problem of having too much. As the saying goes, the rarer something is, the more valuable it is. Anything, once there was too much of it, it would no longer be valuable. Thus, sometimes a harvest would instead become a small disaster. In this way, it would definitely affect the enthusiasm of the common people. If they did not work hard to farm in the coming year, what would they do when there was a famine? Without enough grain, It was inevitable that people would starve to death. This was something that Yang Qindong absolutely could not allow to happen. If he wanted to solve this problem, he had to think of a way. Yang Qindong thought of a phrase in his heart: protection price. Yes, protection price. It referred to the lowest standard price for each crop. If they sold at this price, the common people would not earn much, but they would definitely not lose out. In this way, no matter what kind of harvest it was, the common people would not have to worry about not being able to sell their grain. This way, their enthusiasm would become higher and higher, and the grain produced would naturally increase. As for how to deal with the grain that was bought at the protection price, if it were someone else, they might have a headache, but Yang Qindong did not need to worry. The current Xianxia's territory was so large that it was unimaginable. It was far beyond the ancients. With such a large territory, it was impossible to have a harvest everywhere. He could transfer grain from the south to the north or from the north to the south. In this way, no matter where there was a famine, he would not have to worry about it. He could use the grain to adjust. Besides, he could also sell the surplus grain to other forces and countries that did not belong to Xianxia. This was especially true for some small countries that did not have much history. They had never had enough grain to eat. As long as the price was reasonable, everything would not be a problem. Since he thought of the protection price, Yang Qindong felt that it was necessary to carry out this matter immediately. Now was the time for a harvest. He could not hurt the common people because of too much grain. Beta Persei, send someone to inform the Chu-Yi city's government office. Tell them that I'm here. Since the matter was almost understood, Yang Qindong did not need to hide his identity. He also wanted to see the officials here and give them some encouragement. After all, the development here was still very good. The news of Bugnam of Gojoseon's appearance in Chu-Yi city quickly spread. After the local officials heard it, they all opened their mouths wide in disbelief. Speaking of which, they were just the managers of a small town. At best, they were just a 7th-grade county magistrate. Now that they were going to meet the so-called emperor, who would not be nervous. Fortunately, Yuan Chunqing, one of the 3 generals of Vietnam province, was training troops near Chu-Yi city. First of all, Chu-Yi city was a coastal town. There was an army stationed here. Once there was any danger, they could be the first-line soldiers to block and buy time for the main army to arrive. Second, the Vietnamese auxiliary soldiers could also help the nearby farmers to harvest crops. In coastal cities, hurricanes could appear at any time. With them there, some unpredictable losses could be reduced. Yuan Chunqing had seen Yang Qindong before. However, at that time, Yang Qindong's status was far from as noble as it was now. When he heard that Bugnam of Gojoseon had appeared in his territory, Yuan Chunqing tidied up his clothes and said to the bodyguard beside him, "Immediately inform Governor Yuan of this news. Be quick." At this time, the security of Chu-Yi city's government office had been taken over by the Black Cavalry. They had changed back to their military uniforms and were wearing black armor and black helmets. Only their mouths, noses, and eyes were exposed. With just a glance, a murderous aura rushed over, causing many officials who had not been on the battlefield to be nervous and shocked. As Vietnam province, which was only a province of Xianxia, the officials here were not all Han people. Among them, a small number of them were from foreign races. These non-human beings were all literate and knowledgeable. Their appearance greatly alleviated the lack of Han officials. It was also because of the existence of these people that the various government offices were able to operate quickly. Once there were any new policies, they would be able to be transmitted to the ears of the people in time. Of course, Yang Qindong had never truly believed in the foreign races. Thus, these people did not occupy any important positions. Not only that, they would also be like the Han officials, adopting the system of transferring officials. That was to say, they could only stay in one place for a maximum of 4 years. After 4 years, they would definitely change places. This could prevent them from joining forces to the greatest extent. Yang Qindong's sudden appearance caused the officials to be surprised and excited. They were excited and somewhat afraid. After all, Yang Qindong had led the 5-star army to expand the territory and killed countless people. Often, wherever the army passed by, countless statues would be erected. Thinking about the scene of those dead people's heads being placed together, only a few people could not help but tremble. After meeting the officials one by one, Yang Qindong smiled and praised them, causing each of the officials to feel as if they were bathed in a spring breeze. Yuan Chunqing, who was at the side, also helped to introduce the names of the officials, their positions, what they were in charge of, their contributions, and so on. This also allowed Yang Qindong to have a more intuitive understanding. After meeting the officials and at Yang Qindong's request, Yuan Chunqing found the person in charge of Chu-Yi City's Yang newspaper, the so-called reporters, representatives of merchants, representatives of farmers, as well as representatives of the handmade industry and some small factories. Chapter 1354. For 3 whole days Yang Qindong met with people from all walks of life. He got first-hand information, and through talking with these people he had a deeper understanding of the situation in Yunnan province. On the night of the 3rd day, the travel-worn governor Luan Shaochen finally arrived at Chu-Yi City and came in front of Yang Qindong. 4 years ago, Lin Qindong ordered the governors to be replaced. Luan Shaochen was transferred from the governor of Laos to the governor of Yunnan province. Although he was called Governor Luan, he was not young, 28 years old. When he first took office he was only 19 years old. Now that 9 years had passed, the facts had proven that Yang Qindong was right to let his brother-in-law take the position despite the objections of the masses. Just from the results, Yunnan province had always been in the first place, far better than the surrounding provinces such as Laos. Just from this point, it was enough to prove that Luan Shaochen's ability was reassuring. 6th Young Master. After seeing Yang Qindong, tears flowed down from Luan Shaochen's eyes. It was true that he was the governor of Yunnan province, and it seemed that he had a high position and power, equivalent to the master of a force, but he had never had such an awareness in his heart. In his eyes he was just an official under Yang Qindong. He came to Yunnan province only to start working, in order to better repay Yang Qindong's kindness to the Luan family. Fortunately, his performance did not disappoint, and he did it to make Yang Qindong satisfied. Good. Yang Qindong also sighed and stood up, shaking hands with Luan Shaochen. He was naturally very satisfied with his brother-in-law, and the other party's achievements also made him proud. But when he saw the real person he couldn't help but sigh. The other party's chin had a thick layer of beard. The other party was almost 30 years old, and he was left in Yunnan province for 9 years. He didn't have time to reunite with his family, nor did he have time to mourn for his parents. Speaking of which, he felt sorry for the other party. The two of them held hands and walked down together. Yang Qindong opened his mouth and said, "You've done well. The current development of the Vietnamese province has greatly exceeded my expectations. You've also completed your task well. How about it? Have you thought about changing places?" According to the requirements of the transfer system, the officials would change places every 4 years. It was just that considering that the change of a province's governor would cause a lot of trouble, this system was not implemented so seriously. But in order to prevent the situation from happening, Yang Qindong still decided to change the governor who had been in office for more than 4 years. Just to form a kind of routine, this time he asked for Luan Shaochen's opinion. When he heard that he wanted to change places, Luan Shaochen's eyes lit up first and then he shook his head. 6th Young Master, although I have done a lot of things here, it is not perfect. There are still some things that have not been completely solved. I want to work for a few more years to solve these problems. There are endless things to be done. Yang Qindong shook his head and said, "You have solved the problem in Yunnan province very well. The next thing will be handed over to others to do. You have to give others a chance to practice. As for you, you should go to a higher position to learn so that you can take on more important responsibilities in the future." This meant that he was going to put an important position in an important position. Luan Shaochen was naturally grateful. "Okay, I will listen to the 6th Young Master." That's it. In this way you will be ready to hand over the work in the near future, and there will naturally be someone to replace your position. This time I asked you to come over mainly to listen to your report on the situation in Yunnan province, and also to discuss with you the issue of the protection price of food. Of course, you can put forward your own opinions on the issue of agricultural tax and commercial tax. It was already very late at night, but the candles in the study room did not go out. They burned until dawn of the next day. After the two of them had breakfast together, under Yang Qindong's satisfied gaze, Luan Shaochen led a group of Yunnan province officials to send him to Haiphong City. Luan Shaochen watched as Yang Qindong boarded the warship and went straight to Xianxia City. Xianxia City. It was no longer a small seaside city. After more than 10 years of continuous construction, it looked like a modern city. Compared to the straight cement road, there was a street lamp every 50 meters. Within a mile one could definitely see a small park. There were rows of green trees on both sides of the road. Walking here, breathing in the sufficient oxygen emitted by the green plants gave people a feeling of relaxation and relaxation. In the city, there were orderly small districts one after another, and tall buildings made of cement and steel were connected to each other. They used the smallest area to meet the residential needs of more people. Every district had a large square. At night there were people dancing, playing and selling all kinds of snacks and goods. Compared to the dark outside, this place was like heaven. The only imperfection was the hundreds of tall chimneys in Xianxia city. They would occasionally emit black smoke during the day, affecting the spatial state of the entire city. Fortunately, the city lord's mansion had already paid attention to this problem, and had already considered moving the factories under the chimneys out, and building new factories in the suburbs. With the appearance of the rubber trees, there were many carriages and rickshaws on the straight cement road in the city. From time to time one could also see some streets being paved with tracks. According to the well-informed people, track chain cars had been successfully researched, and would soon appear in the entire city and be used on a large scale. At that time, it would greatly increase the speed of people's travel. Everything developed in an orderly manner. Several warships arrived at the new dock at dawn. Then rows of cold vanguard soldiers completely sealed off the dock. A group of generals with gold beans on their shoulder plates lined up in an orderly manner and looked respectfully at the warships approaching the dock. Under the gazes of the deputy commander of the army Lung Feng, the deputy commander of the navy Gao Xiong, and a group of high-ranking officers Yang Qindong, who was still dressed in a green robe, walked out of the cabin under the protection of a group of black cavalry. He saw the group of high-ranking military officers who had come to welcome him. This time when Yang Qindong returned, he only informed the upper echelons of the army. Whether it was City Lord Zhou Xian or the ladies in the palace, he did not send any news. He did not want to affect these people because of his arrival. As for the people in the army, he had to inform them even if he didn't want to. After all, the warships in charge of transporting him were the Navy's warships. Presumably, all the news had already been registered in the Navy's headquarters. Sixth Young Master. Lung Feng and Gao Xiong took the lead and walked forward, giving a standard military salute. Yang Qindong first returned a military salute, then smiled and reached out to pat the two on the shoulder. "Thank you for your hard work. Sixth Young Master, you've worked hard." Perhaps it was because they hadn't seen each other for a long time, but both Lung Feng and Gao Xiong had a trace of restraint on their faces. As Xia's territory grew bigger and bigger, Yang Qindong's status also rose. It wasn't the time when he couldn't play without a certain someone. Yang Qindong still had a lot of feelings for these veterans who had followed him since the beginning. He looked at the two with a gentle gaze and said, "This time I'll be staying for a few months. I'll go to your headquarters to take a look. You just have to be prepared. For now you guys can go back first. I'll go take a look at the city lord's mansion, then return to the palace." In the early morning of the city lord's mansion from afar, one could see a few electric lights lit up. Needless to say, those must be the workers who had worked all night without rest. Compared to the army, which was divided into the navy and army, the local government was completely controlled by the city lord's mansion. Every policy issued from here could affect millions or even tens of millions of people. Therefore, every order had to be carefully considered and considered carefully before it was issued. Zhou Xian worked overtime again. He only slept for a while when the sun was about to rise. Just now the guards brought hot water over. After washing up, he sat down in the spacious and bright office and began to work. Piles of documents that needed to be approved were piled up beside his desk. Xia's territory and power grew bigger and bigger. Every day Zhou Xian had to deal with more and more official documents. Knowing that his responsibilities were heavy, Zhou Xian never dared to slack off. Even during the new year he only rested for a day. As for the usual holidays, there was no such thing. This was not a hard and fast rule, but Zhou Xian took the initiative to request to work overtime. He seemed to always have so much energy, like an old bull that did not know what fatigue was, working hard. This is the document sent by the Wei province. It contains the amount of food that has increased in their provincial warehouse this year. Take out the document from last month and compare it. Yu Qian did not even raise his head as he instructed. However, he did not know that the person standing in front of him was not his secretary or guards, but the leader of Xianxia, the most important person, Yang Chendong. After speaking, Yu Qian still buried his head in the document in his hand. From time to time he would lower his head and write something. After a while, when he felt that the shadow in front of him did not leave, he still did not raise his head and said, "Why don't you go? Can't you find it? Didn't I say? The documents of each province have to be filed separately. Go and look for it properly." After saying all this, Yu Qian still buried his head in his work. However, he quickly noticed something and his face showed displeasure. Although he rarely lost his temper at the staff around him when it came to work, he still dared to scold them. Yu Qian raised his head with a displeased expression and wanted to criticize her. When he raised his head, Yang Chendong's appearance entered his eyes. Although they hadn't seen each other for 2 years, this didn't prevent Yu Qian from recognizing Yang Chendong in the first place. Chapter 1355. The person standing in front of him was actually Yang Chendong. Yu Qian didn't seem to be able to react as he was stunned for a moment. Then he remembered that the battle report said that Yang Chendong would be returning to Zhou Xian city for the new year. He immediately got up and said, "Greetings to Bugnam of Zhou. Mr. Yu, you don't have to be like this. Quickly get up." Yang Chendong quickly reached out and helped Yu Qian up. Then he looked touched. Wars were fought for money and stability at the rear. The reason why the 5-star army was able to win so many battles was because of Yu Qian, who stabilized the situation at the back. If it had to be said, it would be like the lyrics of the song, "Half of the military metal is mine, half of it is yours." The muscles on Yu Qian's face kept trembling as he was supported by Yang Chendong. His grip on Yang Chendong's hands tightened. "Wunan King, you guys fought well." Yu Qian grew up in Great Ming and was used to seeing the people of Great Ming being bullied by other races, especially by the Walla and Tatars. The Great Ming dynasty could only defend and couldn't fight back at all. Yu Qian had once felt sad about this. The so-called Celestial Empire, the so-called 10,000 nations, those were just superficial appearances. It was hard to say when the flames of war would start again. The only thing the Great Ming dynasty could do was to defend the cities. As for the common people outside the cities, they would be bullied, robbed, and even killed. Their money would be stolen and their houses would be burned down. These were all normal occurrences. Even if the news spread to the imperial court, the officials wouldn't just sigh with the emperor. Other than opening the granary and releasing grain, what else could they do? What could they do? What did they dare to do? Yu Qian was once an official in the imperial court. He was angry about this and fought for it. However, when he saw the treasury's silver and grain recorded in the Ministry of Revenue, there was only silence. The country was too poor and couldn't afford to fight any big or fierce battles. Not to mention the Mongolian cavalry in the vast grasslands. Even if you could defeat them, what would you gain? Those nomads were so poor that they didn't even have an iron pot. What was the point of winning? When the cost and the benefits could not be proportional, sending troops to the grassland would become a slogan and a great challenge for the future generations. Like the stars and the moon in the sky, they could only look at them but could not reach them. Yu Qian even thought that if this continued, sooner or later, the Great Ming dynasty would be destroyed in the hands of these grassland wolves. Just like how Yuan defeated Song, who could defeat Ming. Every time he thought of this matter and looked at the lives of the other courtiers, they did not have to worry about food or clothing. All they did every day was fight for power and profit. This made him deeply disappointed. He could not see any hope, nor did he know if this problem could be solved by his descendants. Now, Yang Chendong's sudden appearance had solved the problem that he thought was impossible to solve. The 5-star army not only defeated the grassland wolves that the Great Ming dynasty's people feared, but they also occupied the grassland, built a city, opened up wastelands, and developed businesses. This allowed countless Han people to live a worry-free life. Even the status of the Han people had been raised. Looking at it now, which of the people under Xia's influence did not feel proud to be a Han person? Yang Chendong had done all these things that they did not dare to think about. As someone with a strong sense of national pride, how could Yu Qian not be grateful? No one was more touched than him about the improvement in the lives of the Han people. After all, he was in contact with this kind of work every day and received detailed data from the various provinces. In Yu Qian's eyes, Yang Chendong was like the savior of the Han people. Now that he saw Yang Chendong, he only wanted to kneel down and kowtow to him on behalf of the tens of thousands of Han people to thank him for his kindness. Yang Chendong noticed Yu Qian's excitement and was affected by it. He couldn't help but say, "Mr. Yu, this is the result of our joint efforts. We fought well because of your logistical support at the rear. No, how can our achievements be compared to those warriors who went to the battlefield to kill the enemy?" Yu Qian said modestly, but these were also his heartfelt words. Yu Qian did not sit on the office chair, and Yang Chendong naturally did not sit there either. The two of them found a sofa and sat down. Then they talked about Xianxia's situation. This conversation lasted for more than 2 hours until Beta Persei could not help but remind them, "Young master, it's time to eat." "Oh look, I'm hungry." "Ah, come bring the food here." Yang Chendong chuckled. Yang Chendong and Yu Qian talked about a lot of things for the entire morning and afternoon. They talked about the protection price of food, the specific division of business tax, and the appointment of some provincial and county officials, as well as the economic growth data. The two of them talked about whatever came to mind. In the end, Yang Chendong said, "Mr. Yu, the people are the foundation of the people. As long as the people are stable, the country will be stable. So this prince does not want to increase taxes. What do you think?" "Never increase taxes. What a good benevolent government. Who mentioned the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors? Who said that during the spring and autumn period? This was a true benevolent ruler. The first person in history to do such a thing was Kong Pockmarked, who built slaves. He created a prosperous era of Kong and Qian." It had to be said that Kong Pockmarked was very good at bluffing people. Later on, Master Jin and countless Manchurian remnants thought that this was a concrete manifestation of Kong Pockmarked's benevolent government. And now Yang Chendong appeared here. Naturally, this person had nothing to do with it. He became the first person to propose never increasing taxes. Although he was not an emperor, he was better than an emperor, or even better than an emperor. Since he said never to increase taxes, then he would definitely never increase taxes. Hearing this, Yu Qian's body trembled. His heart was filled with joy. After about a few breaths, he actually knelt in front of Yang Chendong. He bowed and said, "I, on behalf of the millions of people, thank Bugnam of Gojoseon for his benevolent government." Benevolent government. "Good, Mr. Yu, quickly get up, quickly get up." Seeing Yu Qian so excited, Yang Chendong quickly reached out and helped him up. Then he sighed. Even a great talent like Yu Qian was so excited when he heard that the taxes would never be increased. One could imagine what the people would be like when they knew. And the so-called never increase taxes meant that taxes would never increase. The specific meaning was that the tax amount of ding-yin would be fixed, and there would be no increase in taxes. The governors of the provinces would always use the ding-yin as a fixed amount, and there would be no increase or decrease. The new ding-yin would not be counted as ding-yin, and households with more than 1 ding-yin would only have to pay 1 ding-yin. Of course, taxes and taxes were different. Originally, Xianxia did not place much importance on taxes. Even when they needed to use the people, they would still give them money. It was just that it was not much. But after all, this was Yang Chendong's matter. In other words, if one day he was no longer here, would taxes rise again? And now, after Yang Chendong shouted out the slogan of never increasing taxes, the people under Xianxia could be at peace. Because this meant that in the future, Yang Chendong's descendants would also have to respect this decision. This sentence would also become a rule that would be enforced forever. In other words, this could become an ancestral rule of Xianxia. In Xianxia, Yang Chendong was equivalent to an ancestor. This was the difference between him and the ruler of a city. This was also one of the important reasons why in Xianxia's territory, any policy could be implemented smoothly. For example, whether it was the southern Ming or Baiming, if they wanted to make a new policy, they would have to bring benefits to the nobles and the country gentry. Once the new policy harmed the interests of the other party, it would inevitably be met with great resistance. This was also the reason why, apart from Xiangyang's reform, the other reforms had all failed. Their actions harmed the interests of some people, so naturally, there would be many people who opposed it. It could be said that it was extremely difficult to implement it. This was also why the Great Ming had no lack of insightful people, but many good policies could not be implemented. However, in Yang Chendong's case, this was not a problem. He was the ancestor of Xianxia. Whether it was the local government or the military, he was the core. In addition, under the efforts of Xianxia's propaganda department, he had long become a legend. Every word of such a person was like the truth. Who would dare to stop him? Who would be able to stop him? It was just like never increasing taxes. Perhaps if it was someone else who did it, they would have to face all kinds of problems. However, this did not happen to Yang Chendong. Yu Qian had seen the key point, which was why he was so excited. Yang Chendong was also very happy. He was happy to receive Yu Qian's praise. With his support, this work was much easier to do. All right, Mr. Yu, this matter is settled. Later, draft the work in this king's name. Also, please consider the price of food. The standard cannot be too high nor too low. In short, the interests of the people must be the priority. Yang Chendong knew that it was time to leave. Presumably, the news of his return to Crimson City had already spread. His wives in the palace must be very anxious, especially his 2 children. He missed them very much. After not seeing them for 2 years, he did not know how tall they had grown. In the end, Yang Chendong still left the city lord's mansion. Then the group of people went straight to the palace. This time they did not ride a horse. Instead they sat in a carriage. Considering the problem of hygiene in the city, unless the situation was urgent, no one was allowed to casually ride a horse on the streets. In the carriage with rubber tires and shock absorbers, Yang Chendong sat on the comfortable sofa, feeling very comfortable. Looking out the window made of glass and watching the beautiful scenery flash before his eyes, he felt a little excited. Chapter 1356. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was homesick. His wife and children were in the palace. In some ways this was his home. At the entrance of the palace, there was a line of children wearing special military uniforms standing in a row. They held wooden swords in their hands and were dressed in military uniforms. From afar they looked like they were standing in a neat row. Princess Xianxia, who was already 5 years old, was standing at the front of the line. She wore a female military uniform with her head held high and her chest puffed out. Wearing a small beret, she looked like a female general and was very eye-catching. Beside Xianxia stood Yang Bo, who was less than 3 years old. As Yang Chendong's eldest son, he was likely to inherit the throne in the future. At this time he was also wearing a special military uniform. Because of the rich nutrition, he gave off a strong and dignified feeling. The only difference between him and his sister was that he seemed to be unable to stand still. His eyes would occasionally look at the road in the distance as if he was waiting for something. The heir and princess came out together. The only person who could make them wait was naturally their father, Yang Chendong. Yang Bo didn't have much of an impression of Yang Chendong. After all, his father left him when he was very young. Most of his impressions of Yang Chendong came from the mouths of others. From the mouths of others, his father seemed to be omnipotent and capable of anything. Children all worship heroes. Yang Bowie was extremely proud to have such a father. Every time he heard others talk about his father, he would involuntarily puff out his chest. It was as if he was saying to others, "Come, praise my father. I am his eldest son." Under his pride, Yang Bo had more than once thought about what he would look like when he saw his father and how he would perform. But when he really saw Yang Chendong, he became a little afraid. He didn't know if his father would like him. If he didn't, then what would he do? Don't look around. Father will come back at any time. You have to perform well. Yang Jia whispered when she noticed her brother's absent-minded look. Okay. Yang Bo nodded in agreement. But this was only because his sister was usually too dignified. In fact, his worries did not disappear. Instead, he took the opportunity to ask softly, "Sister, do you think Imperial Father will like me?" "Yes, we are all Father's good children. Anyway, Father used to like me very much. I think he will like you too." Of course, little Yang Jia didn't dare to be too sure, so she had to use herself as an example. Little Yang Bo nodded his head again and replied in a half-understanding manner. The group of children was still waiting quietly. Those who could enter this team were not children of ordinary families. For example, there were Tiger's Mane's son and daughter, Beta Persei's son, Yang San's son and daughter, and so on. There were also people like Yu Mion's son, who was also Yu Qian's grandson. Their loyalty was unquestionable and they would grow up together. It could be imagined that these people would most likely become Yang Bo's people in the future, and they would also be the most trustworthy group of people. They were still waiting. After lunch the team began to gather here. In the words of little Xianxia, who was the leader of the children, they wanted to welcome Imperial Father in their best state. They wanted him to see that although they were very young, they could also protect their home like adults and become great talents. Little Xianxia even publicly said more than once that she wanted to be a female general in the future, lead troops to war and expand Xianxia's territory. Under the guidance of little Xianxia, these little friends also had the same idea. They were also fantasizing about one day riding a warhorse and killing in all directions, becoming heroes. The waiting time always felt very long. Fortunately, Yang Qindong's carriage finally appeared. From afar, when a group of carriages came towards the palace and the guards near the palace stood upright and saluted, the children knew that it must be Bugnam of Zhou Xian. Sitting in the carriage, Yang Qindong saw the scene of children standing in a row in front of the palace through the transparent glass from afar. At this moment, Yang Wu, who was in charge of welcoming Yang Qindong, sat beside him. "Young master, it's the princess and the prince. They are standing in line to welcome the arrival of the young master." Upon hearing that his daughter and son were in the group, Yang Qindong let go of all his reservations and said loudly, "Isn't this nonsense? Still very hot at noon today. Who told them to stand here and wait for me? Hurry, speed up, let's hurry over." After the coachman received the order, he immediately cracked the whip and moved forward. Amidst the cracking of the whip, the speed of the carriage increased by a lot. In just a moment they arrived at the gate of the palace. Then the carriage stopped and a somewhat anxious figure walked out. Who else could it be but Yang Qindong? With a golden cloak on his body, Yang Qindong became the center of everyone's attention the moment he appeared. As soon as he got down from the carriage, he walked straight to the girl in front of the line, little Xianxia. Yang Qindong gently picked up little Xianxia and spun her around in his arms. Immediately, giggles could be heard. Little Xianxia said without any feeling of unfamiliarity, "Father, spin faster, faster." This was one of the games that Xianxia was most willing to play when she was very young. She was also naturally bold and did not have the slightest fear of heights. Not only was she not afraid, but she was also very happy to play. Yang Qindong had been constantly training these past few years, and his strength had already reached the master realm. He did not know why he was tired, but he spun faster and faster. The two of them, one adult and one child, laughed continuously, attracting the attention of more people. At the same time, many people's faces revealed knowing smiles. After an unknown amount of time, a seemingly anxious voice sounded, "Father, the child also wants." Needless to say, the person who said this must be little Yang Bo. Only then did Yang Qindong lower his head to pay attention to his son, whose head only reached his knees. Regarding this son, Yang Qindong's impression of him was that he was still an infant drinking milk. However, he did not expect that after 2 years he had grown so much. At that moment, his body only paused for a moment. Then he reached out with his left hand to grab Yang Bo's body, and continued to spin with one hand each. With Yang Bo's little weight, it was naturally not in Yang Qindong's eyes. To him there was no difference whether he spun one or two. On the other hand, Yang Bo was suddenly grabbed and spun in the air. He was really uncomfortable, and the tender flesh on his face even piled up because of this, as if he was about to cry at any time. A real man should not be afraid of anything. Even if you bleed, you should not cry. Bo, you are the first real man of our Yang family's next generation. Even more so, you should not cry casually, understand? Yang Qindong noticed the change in Yang Bo's expression and opened his mouth to speak. This was the first time Yang Qindong had spoken in Yang Bo's memory. It could also be called the first time he had taught him. Yang Bo heard it particularly clearly. Although with his little brain he did not quite understand the meaning of a real man, but when he saw his father's serious expression, he instinctively nodded. This child understands. I am a real man, I will not cry. Ah, good son. Yang Bo's performance made Yang Qindong very happy. At the same time, he praised him and spun even faster. After a while, the laughter of the father and son trio could be heard. Yang Qindong naturally knew the principle of going too far is as bad as falling short. After seeing the hot sweat on the heads of the daughter and son, Yang Qindong gently put them down, and with one hand in each hand he strode into the palace. The main gate of the palace was already open. Usually this gate would not be opened easily. Only when Hu Yan as the first consort went out would the gate be opened. Of course, Yang Qindong also had to follow this etiquette and treatment when he went in and out, but because he was often not at home, the gate was rarely opened for him. Now that Yang Qindong had returned, the real master had returned, the gate naturally had to be opened. In the palace square not far behind the gate, Hu Yan and the other 8 women were already waiting there with a group of maids. Yang Qindong now had 8 wives. Except for Hu Yan, who was the first consort, the others were all side consorts. Usually when Yang Qindong was not around, Hu Yan was in charge. Although the number of people was not small, they got along well. This was not only because Hu Yan had the ability to command, but also because these women could clearly see their own positions. Second, Madame Qiao Yin was born as a maid. Although she had followed Yang Qindong for the longest time, she had a sense of propriety when doing things, and she was very clear about who gave her everything. In her eyes, not only was Yang Qindong her master, Hu Yan was also her master, so she was naturally very obedient. Third, Madame Xiao Yushui, and fourth, Madame Dong Xianxia. Both of them were of noble birth. If it were not for Yang Qindong's appearance, they would probably still be a concubine. Their living environment since young had long taught them who they could provoke and what they could not do. Facing the first consort, Hu Yan, who was a descendant of a famous family, they naturally respected her and did not dare to have any second thoughts. In the eyes of the two, it was already very fortunate that they were not disliked by Hu Yan. Fifth, Madame Tuoya. Although her background was not bad, the various clans were now led by the Han. Just based on this point, she had fallen far behind. After coming to the palace, there were many things that she had to learn. It was already very fortunate that Hu Yan did not pick on her, so how would she dare to pick on her? Sixth, Madame Wan Xiaoyu. She had suffered since young, and Yang Qindong's arrival changed her and her family's lives. In her eyes, Yang Qindong was her benefactor, and so was Hu Yan. Naturally, there was nothing that she would not listen to and obey. Seventh, Madame Suman. Although she was also a descendant of an official, she had declined after all, and when she first came she had the idea of assassinating Yang Qindong. It could be said that she was someone who had made a big mistake. It was already a blessing that she was not punished for it, so how would she dare to act recklessly? Chapter 1357. Eighth, Madame Junko was just a princess of a destroyed country. Moreover, she had lived in Yang village for many years and had lived under the influence of Hu Yan for many years. She had long known what could be done and what could not be done. Naturally, she was very obedient. The madams were all sensible people, and Hu Yan was also a reasonable woman. She never used her status to pressure others. In such a big environment, everyone was naturally good. Not to mention that Yang Qindong had also expressed that his wife did not need to be beautiful, virtuous, or noble. There was only one requirement, and that was that they must be sensible. Otherwise, they would not be fated to be together. If they were not fated to be together, it meant a lot of things. No one dared to make wild guesses. Once they were forced to leave the palace because of immorality, their life would be completely ruined. Although Yang Qindong gave people the feeling that he was very nostalgic, there were some things that could not be challenged lightly. No one could bear the consequences. Under various reasons and circumstances, the atmosphere in the palace was very harmonious. At least, Yang Qindong's important matters had never been delayed because of the harem. He was very satisfied with this point. Holding the small hands of his daughter and son, Yang Qindong immediately quickened his pace when he saw the 8 madams standing in the square waiting for him. He walked toward Hu Yan in the middle of the crowd. Yang Qindong returned to Qixin city. This news did not take long for the whole city to know. Then his figure continued to appear in various places. The munitions factory was the cornerstone of the development of the Yang faction. Accompanied by the chief engineer Feng Ku, who was also his disciple, Yang Qindong inspected many places for 3 days in a row. He also provided a lot of valuable experience. If one wanted to create a firearm, the raw material had to be qualified first. The iron of ancient times did not meet the requirements. The finished firearms that were created would mostly explode. How to make steel, how to press satin, how to build lathes, the level of technical skills and so on had to complement each other. Fortunately, after years of hard work, there was already a set of effective standards. Yang Qindong didn't know much about these things, but there were many books in the warehouse. When they were taken out and placed in the hands of smart people, they would be able to make use of their advantages. Thus, according to the books, they would be able to create more suitable firearms. The Type 95 rocket launchers, Grenades, bullets, and artillery shells had already been formed. Now the materials were being turned into finished products. There would be more machine tools and more firearms that Yang Qindong knew would be manufactured. Although it would be a long process, Yang Qindong knew that more haste, less speed. He did not ask Feng Ku to speed up the research. What he needed was a safe and stable development. Remember, every weapon you make has to be up to standard. When the soldiers are fighting at the front lines, they are fighting with their lives on the line. If the weapon is not up to standard, then there will be huge problems. Yang Qindong was in the large conference room of the munitions factory. He had a serious face as he spoke to Feng Ku and the other higher-ups of the munitions factory. The people below were all holding pens and recording with their heads lowered. Occasionally, when they looked up and saw Yang Qindong talking, they all had expressions of admiration and conviction on their faces. In the entire Xianxia, Yang Qindong was the undisputed leader. In the eyes of many people, he was an omnipotent existence. It was also because of his appearance that everyone was able to live a good life that they didn't even dare to imagine before. Because of this, no one in the Xianxia disobeyed his words and no one didn't believe him. For firearms and weapons that can be produced and used normally, we can add more lathes to ensure quality and quantity. As for how much money you need in this regard, you can apply to Mr. Yu. In this regard, the city lord's mansion will also vigorously support. As he spoke, Yang Qindong nodded lightly to Yu Qian, who was sitting at the side. Yu Qian had been forcibly dragged to the munitions factory by Yang Qindong to participate in this meeting. Ever since he saw that Yu Qian had lost a lot of weight, Yang Qindong decisively gave the order that in the future, Yu Qian's job would be to take care of himself and listen as a supplement. What kind of person was Yu Qian and how upright he was, the history books had already given the answer. This person was also a person who could see the big picture. This was very rare. It must be said that Xianxia didn't lack talents. After all, there were so many places for people to display their talents. As long as people were willing to work hard, there was a ready-made platform, and there was no need to be afraid of no results. But among these people there were still too few who could see the big picture. Perhaps they were loyal enough, but their brains weren't flexible enough. Or perhaps they were clever enough, but they had too many tricks up their sleeves. These kinds of people weren't very useful. Who knew when they would cause a big mess? There were also some people who were steady enough, but they were too inflexible. This wasn't suitable for the rapidly developing Yang faction. In comparison, there were too few leaders like Yu Qian, who had a strength of character, was very calm and could change according to the situation. Before a suitable replacement was found, Yu Qian's body naturally needed extra attention. Yang Qindong gave the order that in the future he didn't need to worry about small things. He only needed to take care of the big things. So he brought Yu Qian with him wherever he went. While letting him relax, he also tried to change his way of working and his body's condition. In fact, Yang Qindong had already changed Yu Qian's life. If he hadn't appeared, Yu Qian would have been dead for more than 2 years. Yu Qian carefully listened to Yang Qindong's instructions to the munitions factory, nodding from time to time. In the past, it wasn't that he didn't pay attention to the munitions factory. It was just that he didn't understand the rules here. Usually he only saw some words written on paper and then some instructions on how to transfer money. Now that he was following Yang Qindong, he had a more intuitive understanding of the situation here. Of course, he knew the importance of the munitions factory. He immediately nodded. "King, don't worry." Unknowingly, Yu Qian also finally changed the way he addressed Yang Qindong. Just the word "king" was enough to prove that he recognized the other party in his heart. Speaking of which, people like Yu Qian had a very strong sense of loyalty to the king. Although the ancients often said that water could carry a boat, it could also sink a boat. They also often said that the people were the foundation of the country. But how many people could really do that? Even the previous Yu Qian couldn't do it. When there was a conflict between the king and the people, he would still consider things from the king's side. But now, after seeing Yang Qindong's actions, seeing the Han people living under the Yangxia's rule, and seeing how the Han people's lives were much better than before, and how the Han people were beginning to show their value, bringing all kinds of benefits to the Yangxia, he finally understood. People. Just how powerful was the people. He finally understood what it meant to be a true citizen. He also finally understood that the people he served before were only the scholar officials and country gentry. He also finally understood that he had taken many detours before. Only the people at the bottom could represent the will of the people. As long as they lived well, the entire Yang faction would have unimaginable power. In other words, when Yang Qindong worked for the people, he was also working for himself. While creating good living conditions for the people, he was also paving the way for himself to achieve his goals and desires. When he really put the people first, his position became more and more stable, and the Xianxia's development also became more and more powerful. If one looked carefully at the development of the Xianxia, how could it not be a process of reform? Since ancient times, there were actually many so-called reforms. The famous ones were Wang Engshi's reform and the Wuxia reform, and the less famous ones were unknown. The only one that was successful was Shang Yang's reform. Why was that? It was because the reform was like cutting meat from the big clans, and it was like snatching food from the hands of the people who benefited from it. They had to face the obstruction of these powerful people. It was easy to imagine how difficult it was to succeed. Even with the support of the king, it was difficult to succeed. But looking at the development of the Xianxia, there was no such difficulty. First of all, the development of the Xianxia did not need the support of the big clans. Not only that, every time they occupied a piece of land, whether it was the local rich clans or the country gentry, they would become the first targets to be dealt with. Half of their family property would be confiscated, and then the whole clan would be divided into countless branches and moved to a foreign place. This made it impossible for them to work together to do anything that displeased the Xianxia. Second of all, with the help of Yang Qindong's various advanced ideas, Xianxia did not lack money. All he needed was people. He did not need the support of the big clans. As long as the people approved of him, he would be able to develop better. Third of all, from the beginning of the development of the Xianxia, he paid attention to fairness and justice. He paid attention to treating everyone equally. Because the guiding ideology played an important role, it changed the understanding of the people. This also greatly weakened the influence of the big clans. Fourth of all, Yang Qindong was a pioneer. He had the ability to keep his word. It could be said that as long as he did not make any mistakes, the development of the Xianxia would not have any problems. At the same time, he did not need to rely on anyone's strength. The big clans could not display their strength even if they wanted to. In short, the big clans did not have the opportunity to perform. They did not have the power, so all the changes could be carried out as they wished. No one could stop them. After leaving the ordnance factory, Yang Qindong, Zhou Xian, and the others went to the secret tank base under the accompaniment of Feng Ku. They took out a total of 5 tanks from the warehouse and parked them there. One of them had been dismantled into countless pieces and became various small parts. The creation of a tank was a gradual process. It was not something that could be created just by saying that it could be created. Key components such as the engine were even more of a headache. Even Feng Ku, who was regarded as a once-in-a-century genius and had great talent, was helpless. Therefore he used the stupidest method, which was to imitate. Chapter 1358. Following suit, he dismantled each component and memorized their locations. Then they copied them one by one and finally pieced them together to create a new tank. In fact, after 2 years of hard work, most of the parts have been created. The polished parts were no different from the original parts. There were no problems with the style or specifications. However, when it came to some core technologies, they were unable to do it. Looking at the various parts on the ground and the number of engineers standing in the room, Yang Qindong knew that these people were working very hard. But even so, Yang Qindong wasn't optimistic about them. The difficulty of building a tank wasn't limited to the engine, but more importantly, the tank cannons that allowed the tank to unleash its power. Tank cannons were mainly cannons. High chamber pressure, long barrel, fast initial velocity, high abrasion, high precision requirements, and high metal smelting, processing technology, and design standards of a country were all very high. Also, it was important to note that cannons required cannons and cannons. The manufacturing of various cannons and cannons also required a lot of knowledge. However, these were not things that the current Yang weapon crafting stone could overcome. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a saying in the future. The number of countries that mastered tank cannon technology was less than the number of countries that mastered atomic bomb technology. From this point of view, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that tank cannons were harder to build than atomic bombs. But it didn't mean that it was hard. The research process couldn't be stopped. Otherwise, there would never be a day of success. Yang Qindong didn't mean to dispel everyone's enthusiasm. He just said to Feng Ku, "The difficulty of building a tank is very high. There are also many problems that need to be solved. Don't think about becoming a fatty in one bite. It's better to do it step by step. Listening to Yang Qindong's guidance, Feng Ku also said with a serious face, "Yes, teacher, you're right. We're doing the same. Now we're researching a small engine. If we succeed, we can build a vehicle." When the word vehicle was mentioned, Feng Ku's face was also full of excitement. When he first heard this word, he was so shocked. Even now, thinking about it still made his blood boil. Yes, you're right. But building an engine isn't something that can be done overnight. Before that, we can build something else, such as a steam engine. Yang Qindong didn't plan to spoil things by rushing them. He still decided to follow the path of history. Steam engine. A thoughtful look flashed across Feng Ku's face. Previously, he had received a book about the steam engine from Yang Qindong and had studied it for a while. However, ever since he saw the engine, he put it aside. In his opinion, since there was already something more advanced, of course he should use it. That's right, the steam engine. That thing doesn't require much core technology, and with the current strength of the ordnance factory, it's possible to research it. In the future we will build a large number of railway tracks. Let's start with Vietnam and Laos. When the time comes, we will build railways that extend in all directions. This way, whether it is the mobilization of troops or the transportation of goods, it will be greatly improved. At this time, Yang Qindong had already begun to imagine the appearance of a train with thick smoke running amok in his territory. It must be very spectacular. In this way, the transportation under his rule would be greatly improved. In the future, no matter where he went, not only would it greatly shorten the time, even if there was a problem, reinforcements would also arrive in the shortest time possible. It would also play a great role in promoting the security and stability of the forces and the allocation of goods. This was no longer a discussion but an order. Feng Ku also knew that he was too anxious for success, so he nodded heavily. Yes, teacher, this student will immediately adjust the direction of the research. Yang Qindong was also very satisfied with Feng Ku's performance, but he didn't want to dampen his enthusiasm. After thinking for a while, he said, "How about this? The engineers who are researching the engine don't have to stop. I will get some small engines for you to use later." As he said this, Yang Qindong sighed in his heart. It's time to get some vehicles used by the army. Not only were there weapons and ammunition in the warehouse, there were also quite a few vehicles. There were even some very old military three-wheeled motorcycles. Relatively speaking, their manufacturing was simpler, and the structure of the engine was easier to imitate. It was suitable for the engineers to study. As for how to explain the appearance of these things, even tanks had appeared, so was there a need to be afraid that they wouldn't be able to explain it clearly? Small engines. Hearing this, Feng Ku's eyes lit up. He seemed to have thought of something and couldn't help but ask in excitement, "Teacher, did you find something in the mountains?" Previously, in order to explain how the tanks and weapons and ammunition appeared, Yang Qindong had told Feng Ku and the others that they were all found in a mysterious mountain. After Yang Qindong had already told the students that this world didn't exist independently, and that it was likely that there were other high-tech civilizations, the students were no longer unfamiliar with the term UFO. The latter explanation was that these things found in the mountains were very likely products of other worlds, but they were accidentally forgotten in a certain mountain. Although it sounded ridiculous, at least it was an explanation. What was more important was that Feng Ku and the others believed him, which saved Yang Qindong a lot of time and effort. And just 3 days after the inspection of the munitions factory, more than a dozen military three-wheeled motorcycles, four-wheeled cars, and trucks appeared in the most heavily guarded tank test area of the munitions factory. Of course, these were all done in secret and outsiders didn't know about it. Yang Qindong had long focused on other aspects. Under the company of Governor Zhou Xian, they walked around the other factories for the past few days. At this time, other than the fact that there were no cars on the streets, Qian City was no different from a city during the Republic of China. Walking on the wide road, all kinds of carriages and rickshaws could be seen everywhere. On both sides of the road, all kinds of shops had sprung up like bamboo shoots after the rain. For example, there were clothing stores, department stores, food stores, theaters and hotels. They had everything that one could think of. Compared to the restaurants, inns and silk shops of the outside world, it was like heaven and earth. Once an outsider entered here, it was like Granny Lu entering the Grandview Garden. Their eyes were not enough to take in everything. Among these outsiders was the Spanish merchant, also known as François Garcia. As the Kingdom of Spain was very developed in the maritime industry, when the sea route was continuously opened up by them, a large number of adventurous merchants set up fleets and began to travel everywhere. One after another they discovered unfamiliar places and made a lot of money. Whenever these sea merchants appeared in a place, if they were strong and their opponents were weak, they would directly destroy and plunder them. If their opponents were strong, they would lower their noble heads and trade with them. While reaping huge profits, they would also think of ways to exploit your strengths and find your weaknesses to give you a fatal blow. Rather than saying that they were adventurers and merchants, it was more accurate to say that they were pirates of the sea. Garcia was one of the pirates. When the other merchants were still targeting the Western world, he had already braved the wind and waves to the east. Fortunately, he appeared in Xian City. After stating that he was a merchant of the Kingdom of Spain, he was allowed to enter the port and come to Xian City. Just like how the Western countries wanted to understand the Eastern world, Xianxia's Navy Department also wanted to know about the outside world. After a few years of preparation, they didn't know how many ships they had sent, and they completely understood the terrain of the nearby seas. Now they were stretching out even further. The arrival of merchants like Garcia was also welcomed by the Navy Department. Their arrival often brought a lot of information that they didn't know about. In this way they could easily obtain more knowledge. After being welcomed by Xianxia's navy, Garcia stepped into Xian City and his eyes were dazzled. Along the way from Spain, apart from a limited number of places, most of the areas gave him the impression that they were very poor. Apart from some nobles who were still living well, the ordinary people were too poor. He even saw a lot of cannibalism. In some places he often only needed to pay the price of a meal to get the local people to do anything for him. After a long time, this feeling gave Garcia a sense of superiority. In his heart, although the world was very big, no one could be stronger than the Kingdom of Spain. Oh, maybe the Kingdom of England was also not bad, but their strength was only about the same. In this era, in the West, England and Spain were indeed the strongest. As for the other countries, they were either very weak or had yet to become independent. What's more, Xiaomei was not even born yet. With this kind of arrogance, Garcia thought that he was better than others and looked at everyone as if they were country bumpkins. When he came to Xian City, he was really shocked. If he didn't see it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have imagined that there was such a strong country on the other side of the sea. There was a straight and wide road here, a clean and hygienic environment here, a street lamp that was as bright as the sun here, a skyscraper that he had to raise his head to see the roof of the building here. In short, there were too many beautiful scenery here that he couldn't imagine before. More importantly, the economy here was very developed and there were many things that he couldn't imagine. Chapter 1359. There were all kinds of luxurious clothes and silky fabrics that he had never seen before. There were all kinds of delicious food and drinks that he had never seen before. There was even wine that was unique to the West and had never been seen in the East. Living in a high-rise building with electric lights, with elevators that could be used to go up and down. It was beyond his imagination. Bicycles were everywhere, vans and carriages could be seen everywhere. What's more, it was very comfortable to sit on them, there wasn't any bumps at all. It was much more comfortable than the carriages of the nobles and even the royal family. Garcia was surprised, but at the same time, the ambition in his heart was ignited. He was thinking, if these good things were introduced to Spain, how much wealth would it bring him? With this goal in mind, he continued to work hard to achieve it. When the Navy sent someone to contact him, he was very enthusiastic, giving the impression that he knew everything, but only he knew what was true and what was false. While gaining the friendship of the Navy, he also used the gold and silver he brought with him to go shopping in Resin City. At this time, the porcelain, tea and silk that were praised by the West were no longer his goal. In his opinion, although these things were precious, as long as he had money they could be bought. What he wanted the most now was something that only Resin City had, something that didn't exist in the outside world. For example, high-quality firearms and artillery that didn't seem to be large in size, but could exert great power. Naturally, it would be extremely difficult to take away such things. What he wanted was not the finished product, but the manufacturing blueprints. With these things, if he had enough raw materials, he didn't know how many finished products he could make. Recently, railed vehicles began to appear in Resin City, which made Garcia's eyes light up. He sent his most capable assistant, Anthony, to find a way to get the blueprints of the railed vehicles, and then he was ready to leave. After a few days of hard work, he had already obtained a bicycle, a military telescope, and the blueprints for a rocket launcher. With just these, he believed that he would be able to sell them for a sky-high price when he returned to his country. Then he would think of a way to come back again. At that time, with enough gold and silver, his goal would be even greater. Sooner or later he would take away all the good things in Crimson City. Then he would use this spear to attack the shield. At that time, it would be possible for him to become the Crimson City Lord. This was a great goal. Although it was difficult, Garcia was determined to do his best to achieve it. He was also looking forward to that day. It was located in a roadside coffee shop, which was also a new thing recently. Because of the elegant environment, it gradually replaced some tea houses and became a new place that many fashionable people were willing to visit. Garcia chose a corner that few people paid attention to. From here he could easily see everything that happened in the coffee shop, but it was difficult for others to notice him. After drinking a cup of coffee, he was still savoring the aroma in his mouth. Suddenly, the door of the coffee shop opened and the tall, fair-skinned assistant Anthony appeared. Accompanying him was a middle-aged man wearing a traditional Chinese suit. He wasn't tall, but he already had a big belly. When the person entered the cafe, he had an arrogant look on his face. After looking around and spotting Garcia in the corner, he strode over with his feet splayed outwards. When he walked, he purposely put his hands behind his back. Fortunately, there were no other customers in the coffee shop at this time. Otherwise, it would be easy to recognize him as an official. The fat middle-aged man was indeed an official, and his position wasn't low. He was the director of the Commerce Department's External Relations Department, Lu Qing. When Garcia first came here, he was the first person he interacted with. His face was full of fat and his small eyes were filled with greed. It was also because of his appearance that Garcia, who had met countless people along the way, gave him his first sum of money. After that he received good treatment. For example, his accommodation was arranged by Lu Qing. Although he had to pay a hefty sum of money, it was very comfortable. Not only were there electric lights, but there was also 24-hour hot water and a comfortable sofa. It was almost unimaginable outside of Resin City. Garcia later asked around and found out that not all foreign businessmen could enjoy such treatment. Some of them had electric lights, but they didn't have 24-hour hot water or a sofa. Based on this, he knew that the money was worth it. As a result, he continued to send money to Lu Qing. After the two of them became familiar with each other, he got a lot of things that he wanted. When Garcia saw Lu Qing sitting down in front of him, a flattering smile appeared on his face. Then he said in broken Chinese, "Director Lu, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Alright, you know I'm busy, so you don't have to be so courteous. Why don't you tell me what you want me to do here?" Lu Qing said impatiently. Garcia, who had interacted with him many times, was confident that he knew Lu Qing very well. This person was a greedy person who only cared about money. As long as the money was given, everything would be fine. Otherwise, he would immediately turn hostile. With a smile on his face, he gently took out a piece of banknote with the number 1000 written on it and placed it on the table. As soon as the banknote was taken out, Lu Qing's impatient expression immediately became much better. He first looked around, and when he found that no one was paying attention to him, he chuckled and put the 1000 taels banknote into his pocket. Then his tone became much friendlier. "Look, we are all old friends, how can I be so shameless?" Lu Qing took the banknote and Garcia's expression became much happier. "Yes, I'm friends with Director Lu, so I need your help." Garcia leaned forward and whispered something in Lu Qing's ear. Lu Qing, who originally had a smile on his face, quickly changed his expression. His brows furrowed together before he shook his head and said, "That thing isn't easy to obtain." "Yes, I know it's not easy, but what kind of person is Director Lu? There's nothing in Crimson City that can stop you. How about this? Get the blueprint and I'll pay you this much." Garcia said and extended a finger. This finger was not 1000 taels, nor was it 10,000 taels, but 100,000 taels. Seeing this, Lu Qing was stunned at first, but he quickly shook his head. "No, this is a serious matter. The blueprints of the railroad tracks are not so easy to obtain. In the middle, many people will be needed. This bit of silver is not enough. Garcia cursed Lu Qing's insatiable greed in his heart. However, when he thought of the value of this item and the benefits he would receive if he were to offer it to the King of Spain, he hardened his heart and extended another finger. "Sold. I don't have much left from the silver I brought this time." With the price of 200,000 taels, Lu Qing finally smiled. Sure. 3 days. We'll make the deal here 3 days later." Okay. Garcia also knew that this item wasn't easy to get. It was all because of Lu Qing's ability that he could get it done in 3 days. Therefore he happily nodded. Lu Qing left without even drinking a cup of coffee. To him, the coffee in this coffee shop wasn't bad, but it paled in comparison to the free coffee from the Department of Commerce. Not long after, Garcia and Anthony also left. Right after they left, the male waiter who was dozing off in the coffee shop suddenly opened his eyes. He immediately asked for leave from another waiter and strode out. No one knew that this waiter had another identity. He was an intelligence officer from the Security Bureau. His job as a waiter in the coffee shop was just a cover for his identity. After all, this was a high-class public place. There might be some private transactions happening here, so it was necessary to arrange for someone to be here. After leaving the coffee shop, this intelligence officer quickly went to the nearest intelligence station. He met with his team leader, Gucci, and told him about his findings and suspicions. From a certain point of view, the Security Bureau and the Central Intelligence Bureau were both part of the Xianxia's intelligence department. They were like the Great Ming's Imperial Guards and the Eastern Palace Guards. They had the responsibility of secretly monitoring hundreds of officials. Once they suspected someone, they could often arrest them without any evidence. They had a lot of power. After hearing his team members' report, Gucci didn't dare to be careless. This matter involved a director of the Department of Commerce, and there were even foreign businessmen involved. If he didn't handle it well, it would have a deep impact. The scope of this matter had exceeded his authority, so he had to report it. At first, Gucci found the deputy director, Dong Hui. Then this matter was reported to Che Chao, the director of the Security Bureau in Xichen City. Looking at the latest information on the desk, Che Chao waved his hand at Dong Hui and said, "I understand. Do what you need to do." Dong Hui knew that he had caught a big fish. He immediately retreated with a happy face. When there was no one in the office, Che Chao placed his hands in front of the telegraph on the table. After switching to a signal station, he began to report to the other side. The wired telephone was still being developed in the Academy of Sciences. It was said that it was about to succeed. Before this, the main leaders of the various departments used this simple transmitter to communicate. Although it was a bit troublesome, it was still much easier than walking out of the office to the destination. Chapter 1360. After Dong Hui left the director's office, he looked for Gucci and asked him to arrange for someone to follow Lu Qing. He needed to know what she had done in the past 24 hours. Including what she had eaten and how many hours she had slept. He also needed to have a detailed tracking record. Gucci knew that it was time for him to perform a meritorious service. He immediately went out and called for a group of more than 10 people to follow and monitor Lu Qing. However, what made him a little disappointed was that Lu Qing's performance was very normal in these 3 days. Other than working normally in the department and reporting to Minister Chong Qianhao alone, he didn't have any contact with anyone else. Even when he was working, he was accompanied by his secretary. He rarely had any contact with anyone alone. Gucci was puzzled. Did he find out that he had sent someone to follow him? 3 days later, when he saw Lu Qing walk out of the Commerce Department and walk towards the coffee house at the designated time, he knew that he was not found out. However, something must have been overlooked. The informant was still lurking in the coffee house, but this time, Garcia was obviously on guard. His deputy, Anthony, actually stood up and blocked the informant's line of sight. In just a short while, Lu Qing had already left. As for what he had done with Garcia, what they had said, and even if they had traded anything, Garcia had no idea. The difference between the Security Bureau and the Daming East factory was that they couldn't arrest people without evidence. This was Yang Qindong's order. Obviously, he was also worried about making some unjust or false cases. After all, people still had to rely on people to do things, and people were selfish. He didn't want this department to be used by others to deal with their opponents. Without enough evidence, The informant did not send out the signal to take action in the coffee house. After Lu Qing, Garcia and Anthony walked out of the coffee house, Gucci, who had been waiting outside, finally could not wait any longer. He entered the coffee house to understand the situation. After learning that he did not see whether the other party had traded anything, Gucci was in a dilemma. After all, this matter involved a director of the Commerce Department and a foreign businessman. If he acted rashly and made a mistake, the impact would be too bad. Following Yang Qindong's order, after the opening of Xi'an City's port, more and more merchants came to Xi'an City. Most of them were yellow-skinned, but there were also some white-skinned and black-skinned people. When these people arrived at Crimson City, they were first shocked by the prosperity of this place. Then they felt a great business opportunity and spent money to purchase goods from Crimson City. At the same time, they also transported some of the ores that Crimson City needed. It was precisely because of the appearance of these sea merchants that the five-star army needed for weapons and materials. Just based on this point, without any evidence, these merchants couldn't be casually arrested. If these people were all scared away, it would be a huge loss to Crimson City and Xianxia. Gucci, who couldn't make up his mind, didn't know what to do. Just as he was wondering if he should take another look, he received a piece of news that made him unable to sit still. Garcia had actually applied to leave the port with his fleet a day later, and it had been approved. Damn it, he's trying to escape. At this time, how could Gucci not see that Garcia was trying to escape? Now, it wasn't a matter of whether or not he had evidence. It was a matter of principle to prevent people from taking confidential information out of Xi'an City. If Garcia wanted to leave, he would definitely take away all the important things. That would be the best time to catch him red-handed. Without any hesitation, Gucci went straight to where his superior Dong Hui was at. Dong Hui also felt that this matter was very serious. After quickly consulting with Director Che Chao, he mobilized over 100 intelligence agents and decided to go to the port tomorrow morning. At the same time, he ordered Gucci to arrest Director Lu Qing at the same time tomorrow. However, because there wasn't enough evidence, it was best not to arrest someone in a public place like the office. Garcia didn't know that he was being targeted. He had successfully obtained the construction information of the rail car. Looking at the various neatly drawn numbers on it, he let out a long sigh of relief. With this item, this trip was worth it. With a smile on his face, Garcia could be said to be asking questions. He looked at his assistant Anthony and asked, "Have you informed the port?" "Yes, we have. Tomorrow morning our ship will depart from the port and return to our country," Anthony replied respectfully. In their country, the difference in status between people was a huge gap. Even if the superior wanted you to die, you had to obey. "Very good. How about this, Anthony, you stay here tomorrow. Don't go back with me. Stay here and continue to keep an eye on this place. I feel that there should be a lot of secrets that we haven't unearthed yet. This important mission will be handed to you. I hope that the next time I come back here I will hear more good news," Garcia said with a hopeful tone. Anthony didn't think about being left behind. When he heard this, his face was naturally filled with shock. However, when he understood the benefits, his face naturally revealed a joyful expression. He was only Garcia's assistant, and there wasn't much credit left for him, unless others were willing to share some of it with him. But no matter what, when there was a great contribution, people would only remember Garcia. How many people would remember him? If he could stay behind to carry out the mission alone, it would be different. The merit wouldn't be snatched away by others. Not to mention, this was Garcia's idea. He had to carry it out even if he didn't want to. "Yes, I'm willing to stay." "Very good. There are still some silver taels left for you. Go ahead and do it." Garcia patted Anthony's shoulder happily and said with a face full of excitement. The Intelligence Bureau finished setting up the surveillance very quickly. The reason why they didn't take action immediately was because they were afraid that if they acted too early, they would startle the opponent and lose the evidence they wanted. Therefore, when they all boarded the ship and were about to leave, it was the best time to take action. The next morning, Dong Hui brought over 100 operatives and waited outside the port early. A few scouts were using binoculars to observe the port. How is it? How is it?" A few operatives seemed to have seen some commotion at the port from afar. They were afraid that someone would steal their merit, so they anxiously asked the scouts. Leader, the Navy inspectors at the port are currently inspecting the Spanish ship that is about to leave the port. They have already found a telescope and 3 bicycles. Both sides are confronting each other. One of the scouts put down the binoculars in his hand and reported everything he had just seen seriously. A leader heard his subordinates report and said anxiously, "What? They have already found so many things. Won't the merit be taken away by them? This won't do." After speaking, he strode towards the place where Dong Hui was standing. Dong Hui was standing under a big tree under the protection of a few operatives. After hearing the leader's report, he only hesitated for a moment before replying, "There's no rush. Let's wait a little longer." Dong Hui was so confident because the other party didn't bring anything big with them during the last transaction. This was something that Gu Qi had already reported. Although he didn't know what it was, he believed that it definitely wasn't a telescope or a bicycle. These things should be more precious and should be hidden very well by the other party. It shouldn't be easily discovered. The deputy director wasn't in a hurry, so the leader could only go back and continue to wait. It wasn't until nearly half an hour later that the ship's horn sounded. The 5 Spanish ships were about to leave the port that the leader became anxious. How could they let them leave? Didn't they already find the contraband? A scout put away his binoculars and stood at attention. Garcia handed over the 5 Spaniards, saying that everything was done by them and had nothing to do with him. After paying a fine, the Navy inspection team let them leave. This scout not only had excellent eyesight, but he also knew how to read lips. Naturally, he understood everything that happened in the distance. The leader didn't doubt this answer. It was because of this that he quickly turned around and ran towards Dong Hui. Soon, Deputy Director Dong also became anxious. Then he led hundreds of people and rushed to the port. This time, the marine inspection team didn't find anything important, so it was time for them to perform. Dong Hui was very anxious and even a little excited. If they found what they were looking for this time, not only would they make a contribution, but they would also be able to suppress the Navy inspection team. Just thinking about it made him feel very happy. However, before he could bring his men to the port, a group of cold front Navy soldiers had already blocked their way. "What are you doing? The Security Bureau is here to do something, get out of the way." Seeing that someone was blocking his way, Dong Hui's face was filled with anger, and his voice had a hint of roar. He received accurate information that there was something wrong with the Spanish fleet. At this time, not to mention the cold front Navy soldiers blocking his way, even the senior officers of the Navy headquarters couldn't stop him. With full confidence, he was about to continue to stride forward, but everything was stopped by the appearance of a figure. Dong Hui had to stop and stand in place. Fifth brother. Just opposite more than 100 people from the Security Bureau, a man in a gray tang suit walked out. His face was very calm, and even if one looked carefully, there seemed to be a smile on the corner of his mouth. But it was such a person. As soon as he appeared, the members of the Security Bureau stopped on the spot. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.